Hello, hello. Welcome. My name is Mike, and I'm a 37-year-old stage 4 metastatic melanoma patient, and unsurprisingly, I talk a lot about cancer on this vlog. But today I actually want to discuss the absence of cancer, remission, NED, no evidence of disease, however you want to describe it. I think it's an under-discussed portion of the patient experience, especially when it comes to the mental health ramifications of being in remission. Now, luckily or unluckily, depending on how you look at it, I consider myself to be an expert on going into and out of cancer remission. That's the unlucky part. But for those of you not keeping track, which means anyone who's not my mom or my girlfriend, I've been an advanced cancer patient for nearly 7 years. I was diagnosed for the first time right at the end of January in 2018, and we're coming up on the end of January in 2025. During that time, I've had remission periods of 4 or 5 years, depending on how you look at it, 15 months, and right now, once again, depending on how you look at it, I probably am NED or in remission. Now, I'm sure this sounds weird to you. How can you not know how long you're in remission for, or how can you have two different definitions of remission? And I actually think that the definition of remission is that you are having no radiologically detected cancer, or your oncologist says, hey, your cancer is suppressed to the amount that you are in remission. But for me, what has happened in 2 of my 3 cancer diagnoses, my first one and this current one, is that I have had a small amount of cancer that we surgically removed, and then by the time we got to the first scan during treatment, I had NED status. That was no evidence of disease. Also, keep in mind that even if there is one definition or another, these are more like guidelines or frameworks, and everything is more on a case-by-case basis to be determined by an oncologist. This is especially important because as modern medicine and cancer treatment gets better and better, it's different for how certain diseases are viewed. For example, metastatic melanoma 20 years ago was kind of a death sentence. The 5-year survival rate was something from 5 to 10%. Now, even though it's still technically considered incurable, my oncologist and several others think that my case is curable. Weird, but it just hasn't been updated to fit the standards of today's care. And so as an oncology team and a patient, we decided that we would use the end of treatment as the beginning marker of my remission period and try to count down towards 5 years. If you don't know, 5 years is somewhat considered the cure point for most cancers, although metastatic melanoma, some people say 10 years, and the reality is it doesn't really matter. If you make it to 5 years in remission from any cancer, there are no rules that it can't come back. I think technically I did, and guess what? It came back. Twice. So for our purposes today, I think we want to define remission as you had cancer, you don't have cancer, you know there's some chance that it might come back, you hope it doesn't. Simple enough, right? I mean, you did the thing, you suffered through treatment, you eradicated the cancer that was in your body, and you just go back to your normal life. Only the thing about cancer is it's so scary because it's open-ended and it does recur so often. And not only that, treatment comes with a whole host of side effects, both physical and mental. Just during my first treatment period alone, which was a year of doing Opdivo, it's an immunotherapy, I developed hypothyroidism, I got gastritis and colitis, I got severely depressed and anxious, my romantic relationship suffered, I became very introverted and locked myself in my room all the time. By the time I was done, I expected that I would just snap out of it and the world would be bright again. But it turns out that remission is really fucking weird, and that's not how it works at all. Like, I distinctly remember finishing my last immunotherapy session and walking out of the oncology clinic thinking that a switch was just going to be flipped, my life would be back in vivid color, and that I was going to repair all the damage that had been done mentally during this time period, and not even close. I took a week off to refresh myself to kind of assess who I was as a person, and I didn't like what I saw, and it didn't get better soon. And like I said before, everyone's case is unique, especially as it pertains to the mental health element of getting through cancer, and this is just my experience, but I've also talked to thousands of patients since then, and this experience is pretty ubiquitous. It is hard to reconcile what you've gone through. You can't unknow what you know, and the fear about being a cancer patient is there for a reason. So once you get to remission, it is not exactly just a straight uphill shot. There's a lot of work that you have to do. And believe me, that work is far too complicated to distill into one sentence, but I didn't just say that right now not to try. So basically, when you go into remission, you're trying to figure out how to cope with your new normal. Because as cliche as that sounds, that's really the most controllable element of the entire experience that we have as patients, how we respond to the things that are happening to us. And I'm not talking about in a physical sense, because sure, we can help ourselves along during our case or in remission by eating healthy and working out and getting good sleep. But realistically, there is a high degree of variability in how we're going to physically respond to treatment. But once we get done with that, it's just a matter of, can you cope with the new life that you're given? Because like I said, there really isn't going back, and you're going to torture yourself if you think you're going to. And that sucks, to put it bluntly. It sucks to mourn your past self in real time. It sucks to live, looking over your shoulder knowing that there's a chance your cancer might come back. And it sucks that often we're reminded of what we've gone through via the damage to ourselves physically and especially mentally. And realistically speaking, the first thing that's going to help you cope, I know I just talked about building your skills, but it's just time. And it's not lost on me or any other patient that I've talked to how unfair rare it is that when you're dealing with an incurable, threatening, aggressive, recurrent, whatever huge, big, gnarly disease, that it's your time that is most threatened, meaning it sends you into this weird existential panic once you kind of get your time back in the first place. And that's great to acknowledge it and everything, but then the question becomes, what is there actionable that we can do? How do we actually make the time better? What skill can we build in the time, even if it's not instantaneous? And with deference to the everyone's case is different thing, and without being too much of an armchair psychologist, I can give you a concrete example from my case. The PTSD that's involved in cancer is substantial, whether it's subconscious or overt. And for me, one of the coping mechanisms of dealing with the entirety of my, threatened mortality and how this is going to fuck up my life for forever, seemingly, my default is to make weird jokes about me dying when people talk about any span of time. It really, really bothers my girlfriend, my family, my friends, the people who care about me, but I just keep doing it throughout 7 years of being a cancer patient. And believe me, I have no problem inherently with these jokes. I have no problem with any sort of morbid humor surrounding cancer. In fact, when I was first diagnosed, I think this was an easy way for me to relate it to people and let people know that I understood the gravity of the situation and that joking about my mortality or the damage that cancer can cause was a good way for us to bond. But when it becomes an almost autonomic reflex to the reference of time or the future, it wears people down. Like, we all know the situation at this point in time. It's been 7 years. Everyone knows my life is somewhat at risk, whether it's small now or it's going to be greater in the future. And seeing my mom or my girlfriend be hurt whenever I reference it doesn't really help me in any way. And in fact, it drags me back to that situation where I'm worried about how my disease itself is going to affect the people around me, and that causes a lot of anxiety for me too. So it's something that I need to wean myself off of. And I can tell you that it took me nearly the entire 4 years of my first remission to get those words out of my vocabulary on a consistent basis. But when I got to remission last year, it was a much quicker process for me to stop that mindset, for me to stop being the person that was always reminding myself and others of what could happen. Now, we'll see how well I apply that during this remission, but I have a feeling it's going to get better and better as I build my skill. Another thing I like to remind patients of, and realistically speaking, I need to remind myself of it all the time, is that these things don't have to be linear, and they just never are. Your skills as a human being are not going to be perfect and linear. You're not going to act the same way all the time. You're not going to act the way you want all the time. And so when it comes to coping, or when it comes to addressing travel anxiety or financial anxiety or setting goals, these are things that I've had real issues with as a cancer patient, both in treatment and during remission. When it comes to making yourself better, it doesn't mean that if sometimes you revert to the bad habit. Sometimes I remind my girlfriend that I'm going to die. Sorry, Caitlin. Sorry, Mom. You all get the point that I'm trying to get better at this, but it's going to happen, and I need to give myself grace during those times. Here's another difficult thing about cancer remission, is that no matter what your perception is of it, no matter how you pictured it, even as you're trending towards the end of treatment, it's never exactly what you thought it was going to be. And this actually, in a kind of juxtaposition, applies a lot to the physical effects more than the mental health effects. Like, when I was done with cancer treatment, I really did anticipate struggling mentally, because I was struggling a lot during the entirety of my treatment. I didn't expect that, like, day 2 of remission, I was going to be mentally healthy again. But I figured that as soon as I was done with treatment, my body would start to bounce back. Turns out that because modern cancer drugs are extremely strong and they stay in your system for a long time, it can be weeks, months, and it was pretty much almost an entire year before I didn't feel like I had like residual fatigue, or I didn't feel like my body was just a little bit off. And sure, there can be some psychosomatic elements to it, but I have talked to many, many people, and they've expressed similar surprise at how long it took for their body and physical vitality to rebound. So I guess the takeaway is that if you're a cancer patient, you're going to have to be, patient. It's right there in the name, during remission, because it's not instantaneous. Also, the caveat to all of this is that I feel lucky that, I have, my thyroid doesn't work and my hips have arthritis, but for the most part, it is fortunate that for the amount of intense treatment that I've done, I am only saddled with those things, and they are manageable. There are plenty of patients who go through treatment and have long-term, non-revertible physical damage, and that sucks. But regardless of how much accumulated damage we have in our bodies or up here, I think it's always important to understand how fortunate we are just to make it to remission. And, I know that sounds a little bit like rah-rah, but the reality is that as cancer treatment gets better and a greater percentage of patients make it to remission, we need to remind ourselves and each other when we talk about it. I'll be candid, I'm making this video because I have a friend who just finished treatment. His cancer, again, I don't want to trauma compare, but he has a cancer that seems very treatable, very curable, and he came to me a couple months into remission. He said, I have no idea how to deal with this. This is harder than the treatment itself. And to some degree, yes. But in another sense, I think life is always like that. If you're living a life that's worth living, you're always going to have these uncharted territories. You're always going to feel a little bit weird about the situation. It's just usually it doesn't come with the underlying threat of a terrible disease like cancer. So I'll leave you guys with the same infinite wisdom that I bestowed upon him during that conversation, which was, yeah, nobody knows. Who fucking knows? You got to embrace the unknown in this situation, because we should be doing that in life before cancer anyway. If you don't have cancer, projecting 10 years into the future is a fool's errand. If you have cancer, it's especially foolish. All these variables are going to change to some degree, and so stressing yourself out over this during remission especially, it just doesn't seem like the right move to me. And I know that's hard to do. I know that once you're done with what you view as this arduous task of getting through treatment, you want real answers, but I don't think that's realistic. And I think it's important for me to express that, and for you to hear that, and for you to express that and come to terms with it in your own way. That's all I've got for today. I know that was kind of a long-winded one, and I think it's important. If you are going through cancer and this has helped you, or you know someone who's going through it, please share it with them. I think this is a conversation that's worth having. Outside of that, I'm going to go spend more of my time doing the things that I love and trying to figure out how this all works. I'll talk to you next time. Bye.